and we are back for the 6th episode of Fireside Chat. This one is June 29th. I'll probably get it out on Monday or Tuesday night. But tonight we are going to talk about deep sea exploration and its legends. So, as we know, the deep sea is somewhere that humankind really can't go very easily, as we've proven multiple times through submarine disasters and the Titan. I wouldn't really call that disaster, I call that hubris. But joining me tonight, we have Red.
Yo.
We have Big Dog Jake.
Hello everyone, my name is Big Dog Jake, and this is my first time recording in an episode of Fireside Chat, and I'm happy to be here, Tobias. Thank you so very much for the invite.
Always happy to invite more people. And we have Ronan the Crusader.
Hello, everybody. Y'all know who I am. I'm Ronan the Crusader. And just like to say thank you very much, Tobias, for allowing me onto the chat.
I'm always happy to have company. Otherwise, it'd just be me and Red talking.
Nobody would want that.
Or me alone, which nobody wants.
Hey, I've seen you get some streams where you're in the multiple hundreds of viewers doing some things, so you must be doing something right, Tobias.
Hopefully somewhere. We'll figure out something. It'll hopefully by the 10th episode maybe we'll figure something out. Eventually there'll be a rhythm. But like I said, the deep sea, we have explored approximately 5 to 10% of the ocean floor in its entirety. And the ocean is what, like 75% of our planet?
Roughly 75% of the
That's
surface
correct.
of the planet is ocean.
And the deepest point,
water at least, yes.
Yeah, the deepest point in the sea is the Challenger Deep located inside the Mariana Trench, which is 35,876 feet deep, or 10,935 meters deep for everyone using non-freedom units.
Yes, it is a point in the ocean that is deeper than the tallest point above water, which would be the tip of Mount Everest, and it is deeper by a non-insignificant amount of distance.
And the pressure down there is absolutely insane.
Yeah, like well over 200 atmospheres of pressure, which is immense, absolutely immense.
Well, let's just say there's a reason saturation diving is both the most lucrative and the most dangerous profession on the planet.
Oh yes, oh yes.
Which, for those who don't know, saturation diving is basically these divers will go down for weeks to months at a time, and they will essentially live inside a compressed air chamber the entire time they're there, so they stay at depth. They never have to come up until after the job is done. But those jobs can last anywhere from weeks to months. And, they still have their 8-hour shift thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if anyone's heard of the Byford Dolphin incident,
that was
was 9
about
atmospheres of pressure. That was only 9. That's essentially the depth of most standard oil rigs.
Mm-hmm.
And the sheer force that happened between 1 atmosphere or 9 atmospheres suddenly becoming 1 launched a couple-ton diving bell about, I think it was like 2 or 3 miles off the side of the ship in a pure explosion.
Yes, it was.
And
it was
everyone inside died immediately. Like, only one guy was violently killed. The other 2, their blood essentially boiled to the point where it was so fast their brains couldn't even process that anything had happened.
And that's kind of the only.
That's why we're so careful with
saving grace, if you will, for lack of a better term, is that those within the compression chamber would have died so quickly that they would not have even comprehended that it transpired. They would have
the 2 who were
before they even blinked.
Yeah, the 2 who were inside the chamber, not next to the door. The guy next to the door got violently disemboweled by the pressure.
He was essentially sucked out by it. Yeah.
He was essentially sucked out of a hole that was less than half his height and like maybe half his width.
Mm-hmm.
And that was instantaneous. But the two guys who were inside, essentially, the reports were they just looked like they had fallen asleep.
Right.
That's who you want to be the one. That's the way you want to go out of the choice.
If you're,
Yeah.
if you're gonna die, at least go out that way.
Yeah, at least
No,
go
I
out in a
mean-
way that you don't even know what happened. It's just you
Yeah,
suddenly
I've
fell
sucked
asleep.
out- Getting
I've
your
always
organs
been of
sucked out
that
through-
opinion that if I'm going to pass away, I would very much like it to be when I am either asleep or am entirely unaware that it is coming.
And that's part of the problem with deep sea exploration is how do we deal with that kind of pressure? Like if we were to build a military base or a scientific base at some point at the bottom of the ocean, just coming back from that wouldn't be easy. I mean, you'd take
No.
days to weeks in various decompression states to just come back to the surface.
Oh yes, you brought up, excuse me, you brought up the Byford Dolphin incident, and the Byford Dolphin was a moving deep sea oil drilling platform.
Yeah, it was a floating rig.
It can move quite slowly, and it would float around the North Sea. And that was just 9 atmospheres at the deepest that they would go. And they would still have to decompress over the course of days to weeks in various stages once they had fully completed all of their work. So not only would they work their normal shifts for weeks to months, but they would have to remain within that decompression chamber over the course of weeks in order to fully decompress back to equilibrium of 1 atmosphere so that they could properly exit without, suddenly having all the fluids in their body boil and effectively explode.
Yeah,
if you will.
essentially a flash boil your entire
Yes.
body. So that was 9 atmospheres of pressure. The depth that the Titan submersible imploded, the Titanic wreck site, is approximately 375 to 400 atmospheres of pressure.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wasn't that because they were using like carbon fiber and
Yeah, it's because they weren't using the right materials that like Navy subs
Yeah.
actually use for going that kind of depth, or actual research vessels like the Alvin.
Yeah, the problem with carbon fiber is it has incredible tensile strength, but its compression and shear strength is
Not good.
nowhere close to its tensile strength, and it had that teardrop shape with which any sort of aquatic engineer or engineer generally would be able to tell you that if you do not have a symmetrical shape, especially if it's not a spherical shape, you have this kind of oblong shape where it kind of comes to a point at one of the ends, you're going to have differences in pressure on the body of the craft, which is going to cause significant structural integrity issues.
And that's not even like half the depth of the Challenger Deep. That's only 308 or 3,800 meters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're going to Challenger Deep to try and figure out like what's at the very bottom of our oceans, at the deepest point, what could be down there, you'd need something incredibly unable to be pushed down like that.
Oh yes.
What?
But it also have to
What-
go down very slowly and come up even slower. So you'd have to have the oxygen to be able to do that.
What's the deepest we've ever gone with a manned craft?
Manned as in like owned by the government or a research corporation,
No,
or manned
I
as
mean,
in
like,
a
it
personal
actually
thing?
has a. Yeah, well, I just mean like as in it has a person in it, as opposed to like.
That would be James
they're
Cameron's
kind of-
descent into the Challenger Deep.
Which he did in 1996 in preparation for or as part of he actually got it funded by the studio that was having him film The Abyss. He somehow worked it into the contract that as part of promotional material for The Abyss, that the studio would fund that expedition, which is crazy that he managed to pull that off.
Yeah, here it is. He went down in 2012, made a historic solo dive to the Challenger Deep, the deepest part of the Mariana Trench, an especially designed submersible, the Deep Sea Challenger. Of course he named it that.
Of course,
Reached a depth of 35,787 feet.
which is incredible.
Actually, it's funny enough. I was just looking up what sort of is the strongest material, I guess you could say, and it brought me directly to this article that talks about the deep sea challenger, saying that it's made of, let me see, isofloat foam, I believe it is what they called it. It says
Hmm?
here that one of the greatest, just something from the article itself. One of the greatest challenges was designing and building the 5.8-meter main section of the submersible to withstand 16,500 psi of
Oh
sea
my
pressure at the
goodness.
maximum depth.
Yeah. And
Now,
here's the thing: if
that
you look at the
apparently
sub's design, it's not a sphere; it's a oval.
is sort of an oval or oblong sort of shape.
It kind of
Hmm.
looks like an obelisk with a round top.
Right.
And it's like that kind of design is the only thing that could get you down there. Because I think any like deviation from that design probably would have had the pressure pushing down on it even worse.
Hmm.
So it's not just material, it also depends on, of course, the design of the craft itself in order to be able to
Yes.
Hmm.
actually withstand all that pressure.
Yeah,
And like there have been numerous dives to the Titanic, so the Titan wasn't unique at all in its dive down to
no.
that area. There have been so many dives down to that they actually had to make it a national monument to prevent people from trying to take souvenirs when they went down there.
Yeah, yeah, they
Right.
effectively made it a UNESCO heritage site, and Ronan, regarding what you were saying, regarding material and construction, we essentially know the strongest geometric shape that you can use, and that's effectively a sphere. The more perfect the sphere that you can make, the greater it can withstand pressure. However, although we have figured that out, it's material science that is almost certainly, besides the time, the food and the water, the oxygen, a human's stamina, if you will, the only limiting factor is material science, attempting to find a material that is strong enough to withstand such immense pressure
I mean,
for
just
more
the
than just a
window that he
handful of
looked out of
minutes.
was 9.5 inches thick,
Yes.
and that was
Yep.
just one window.
And its diameter was incredibly small. Incredibly small.
I'm looking at a thing on. I know Wikipedia is not the best, but it's better than most sites that are just people putting stuff. But the displacement for it was about 11.8 tons, and it was
Oh
24 feet long,
my goodness. Which
and its
is
speed was 3
nothing
knots.
compared to underwater craft. Nothing compared to most underwater craft. Like when you think of a nuclear submarine, even some of the earlier nuclear submarines in the 70s, those are massive vessels. They're massive because they carry hundreds and hundreds of sailors on them. So to
Not to
have
mention
a
the payload it
dirigible
has.
that carries one person, maybe two people, to have it be that weight, even at its small size, to have it be that mass rather, at such a small size, just shows you how dense the material needs to be in order to withstand such pressure.
According to this, the walls of it were 2.5 inches thick, and were tested to
Which, oh
withstand
my
the
goodness.
required 114 megapascals, which is
Oh,
about
oh, oh, oh.
16,500 pounds per square inch.
If you're
Right.
measuring over a single megapascal, that is an incredible amount of pressure. I
And this was
mean,
at 114.
the the if I remember correctly, this is just a little fun factoid that we don't need to necessarily go into. But um, my grandfather worked on the shuttle program, the space shuttle program that the U.S. did, and he had a double doctorate in chemistry and physical chemistry and chemical engineering, and the solid rocket fuel in the large white rocket boosters that went on either side of the main rocket were of his design and his fuel, and so he knew a lot about the shuttle program. The shuttle its walls weren't even close to that thick. At the thickest point would be at the nose. That would just to withstand the heat. Of course, they use different materials for that. You don't have to worry as much about pressure. You're worried more about temperature. Obviously, you don't have to deal with atmospheric pressure in space because there is none. How many atmospheres does a spaceship have to withstand? Well, zero, basically. But
Yeah, it's mostly
even
the
at
re-entry
some
you got to worry about.
yes, and even at its thickest points, it wasn't more than 2 inches at most, except on the nose where it just had a lot of uh, extremely temperature resistant material. The
Right.
rest of it was relatively thin, comparatively speaking.
Yeah, it's like I know people are like, "Oh, why don't we just test space stuff in the ocean?" Because they're two completely different environments.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
There,
what it would
there's
take for
a
us to build a base on Mars or on the moon is not the same as what we would need to build a base in the ocean.
Tobias. You reminded me of a line from Futurama where Fry is flying the spaceship, and it excuse me, and the spaceship is about to crash into a plane and crash into the water. And he asks the doctor, how many atmospheres of pressure can this spaceship take? And the doctor says, well, considering it's a spaceship, I would say about 0 atmospheres.
Oh, jeez.
Futurama did have a lot of science stuff in among all the comedy.
Oh yeah, their main writer had a doctorate from MIT in astrophysics,
Damn.
and man, he's a funny guy. He was a
That's
funny
actually
guy,
really
absolutely.
cool.
It is amazing how many people you don't think about who have that kind of like scientific
Hmm.
knowledge. Like I think it's one of the other members of Queen. I think it was an astrophysicist as well.
Yes, the guitarist for Queen.
Brian May.
I am blanking on his name. Brian.
Isn't it
Yeah, Red
Brian
just said that.
May?
Yeah, Brian May.
Yeah, thank you, Red.
Hmm.
Not a honorary degree. He legitimately went back to school and got his doctorate in astrophysics, and I think he was around 70 when he completed that degree.
Damn.
And
Yeah,
he just decided, you know what, I'm going to go back to school, and I'm going to do it the right way. You know, actually take the classes, actually take the courses, actually do all the testing and stuff.
And I mean that still brings to the point like how smart people would have to be if we were to build something under the ocean for like a more permanent exploration.
Well,
Indeed.
one thing that I thought was really interesting because when you had asked me to come on the podcast to talk about deep sea stuff, I remember hearing this article about how there's a bunch of different sites that that people know of, like going down to the Titanic, but there's a lot of shipwreck sites, especially like World War II era ships, that are all over the Pacific, and some at a lot of different depths, so it's not as difficult to get to, but they
Mhm.
started disappearing. And then they were like, well, where the hell are these ships going? And then they thought, maybe it was, something eating the steel, something going on. And what it turned out to be is, so there's a type of steel called low background steel, also known
Mhm.
as pre-war steel. And it's
Yes.
any steel that was fabricated before the A bombs went off. And they were, all these ships were actually getting cut up by submersible vehicles, and then getting hauled to the surface because they need that steel because it's worth a shitload of money, and then you can also do lots of specific science related stuff with it, or like
Right.
making stuff, like very really high end things like chips and stuff like that. So
And it's
um,
not affected by the
I
radiation that we currently have with a lot of metals.
yeah, and so I was like,
It's
how?
clean.
Yeah, and I was like, well, where else are you going to get a large number or pieces of this kind of steel? It's like only going to be in these shipwrecks because they were around. There's not a lot of it that's even preserved besides individual objects of things that were made out of that. But I thought that was just super interesting. They said that it was a lot of these Chinese companies were doing it, and they were putting what looked like fishing trawlers over the top of them, but it's just cover for the cables that go down to the submersible to bring it back up and then haul it away. It's like, what a crazy way for
Interesting.
it. Yeah, I was like, what a crazy way for those ships to go. Well, and even weirder is like, can you imagine if you're like, okay, I've gone down here, we've seen this ship, however many times, and then you go there and it's not there anymore. Like, what the
Yeah,
hell?
really.
Where did it go? Like, how weird and how
How do you
eerie that'd
lose
be.
a
But it's
ship?
like,
Yeah,
exactly,
really.
and
Such a
and it's
large
like
vessel.
also, well, how do you protect them? What are you going to put? Is the government going to pay for people to sit on top to make sure things come down there and don't steal them? Like, how do you even protect that from happening to other sites, other than if they're in, sight of like a really common. But it only takes as long as it does for them to actually get down there and cut it up and just haul it up to the surface and then take off.
Right.
So
And
it's
I'm
like,
trying
how
to
do you even protect
remember
that?
because this also affects a organization that Josh Gates works with a bunch of his exploration unknown stuff. They try and locate the KIA and MIA from World War II, and a
Mm.
Right.
lot of those are
Okay.
from the shipwrecks and downed planes. But it's like if
Right.
you can't find the shipwreck because some other company took all of that, how are you supposed to find the people that were attached to it? Like
Yeah.
how many people's families are missing closure because some Chinese company said, "Hey, we need this metal," and they took it all, and the ship is
Right.
gone
Yeah.
as well as the records.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
vessel that has sat at the ocean floor at whatever depth for 50, 60, 70 years, and you go back to look at it one day and suddenly it's just not there anymore.
Yep.
There's no paper trail. You have no idea who took it. You can make an assumption, but it's gone.
Hmm.
And then we have the opposite problem with the Russian subs.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole problem with the Russian nuclear subs. Okay, so a lot of the ocean is currently at some level of radioactivity. But if we could remove 3 items that are all Russian made, it would reduce the amount of radioactivity in just the Arctic Ocean by 90%. And 2 of those are nuclear reactors and submarines.
What?
Yeah.
Well,
2 specific nuclear subs are estimated to contain 1 million curies of radiation, which is about a quarter
Good.
of the radiation released in the first month of the Fukushima disaster.
to tie into that, Tobias and Ronan and Red, you guys might not be aware of this. I have some military friends, some of which are sailors, and I have it on good authority that although they have not shared with me any things that would be classified or secret, um, when it comes to Chinese and Russian subs, at least in comparison to U.S. subs, it's declassified. It's very common for um, sailors to go on deployment to, let's say, the Arctic Circle in a submarine. Basically, the submarine is parked on the ocean floor for about 6 to 8 months, basically however long the food will last, and that's their deployment. And Russia, again, I have it on good authority that Russian and Chinese subs are comparatively incredibly loud, and United States subs can detect them from quite far away. We're talking like well over 100 miles away.
Right, because sound
That's how
travels
loud
very
they
well
are.
through water.
Yes,
And that's
yes,
why the
and
whole
when
point of a
you
lot of our Cold War projects was how quiet can we make this?
yes, and
Was
when
specifically
you
because water, I don't know exactly how it works, but apparently water does really well with sound waves and continually pushes them forward.
yes, well, it's because the medium is so. What when you think about air compared to water,
That's the term I was
for lack
thinking
of a
of,
better term,
medium.
is so much thicker that the medium of water allows sound to travel so much further. So instead of in the upper atmosphere or here even in like mean sea level, using high frequency or very high or ultra high frequency antennas to to capture radio waves, and we've even moved to things like 5G compared to 4G, which the reason there needs to be so many 5G towers is because the waves cannot penetrate as far, they cannot travel as far, so you need many more towers in order to continue that signal. Whereas a submarine under the water, they can extend their extremely long, sometimes even longer than the length of the vessel, antennas using
What?
ultra low frequency, and they can detect sound from thousands of miles away. They might not necessarily know what it is, but they can detect sound from extremely, extremely far distances.
Well, isn't
And
that
also,
also from like the bloop and other sounds like that? Like why we pick them up like
Yes.
500 miles between
Yes.
the two?
yes, that's how we were able to pick up certain sounds like that, even though we might not know where they necessarily originated from
Or what they
or
were.
what
Because a
gave
long
off
time
those
people
sounds.
thought it was ice quakes, and that's the
Mhm.
general theory now. Is they were ice quakes. But you still have those people who's like, well, what if it was some kind of creature down there?
And just a small little anecdote that you guys might be aware of. I'm sure you guys are aware of Tom Clancy, probably the Tom Clancy games, probably some of his
Yep.
novels like Rainbow Six, Splinter Cell.
course.
Tom Clancy had numerous connections in the military, and he was very meticulous in the detail when he would describe military vessels, military craft, whether they be land, sea, or air. And there's actually a famous speech that Ronald Reagan gave in 1986, 87, something like that, where he held up a Tom Clancy novel and said, how the hell does he know this? Because inside of that novel was the description of the capabilities of a U.S. submarine, which were thought to have been classified. And the President of the United States publicly addressing the Congress or Senate or giving a speech held up a copy of the Clancy novel and says, how the hell does this man know these things?
Damn good
Some
research.
state secrets are not
that's nearly
safe with
50 years
writers.
ago at this point.
Off topic kind of thing, but that sounds as comparable to like when leaked aircraft and tank designs are put into War Thunder.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's,
Like how many military
really.
leaks have come from the War
Oh,
Thunder
gosh.
forums?
The people in War Thunder who think that, oh yeah, well you think the T-90A can take out an Abrams M1A3? Well, here I'm going to post the entire user manual and design specifications for it, which are totally classified. I just happen to be in the military, and I'm going to win some points here on the forum. Oh, also, I'm going to be arrested by some federal police and go to prison for a few decades.
All because I want to prove a point.
Yeah,
man had a lot
was
of
he right?
Yeah, really.
to perform some espionage there. I'll give him.
Another side note. Do you guys know why? I'm sure Red knows, but why in World War One, or why tanks are called tanks?
It was just a totally made-up word. They just were trying to think of a word that would seem ambiguous, that nobody would know what it necessarily meant or what it would look like.
Nope.
They just
Well, you're kind of
It's a
close,
word.
but the whole thing
And
Is it
and-
water tank?
Yes, it's from water tanks because during
Water
World War
tanks.
One, during the
Okay.
experimentation of tanks, they were like, okay, how are we going to disguise these finances of all the experimentation we're running with these vehicles? And
That's
so they
what
put them
it is.
all as water tanks. We're sending water tanks to the front,
that checks
and
out.
that's why they
clever.
call them
That checks
tanks.
Dude, that's crazy. I remember hearing something that had to do with water tanks and did not remember the story. Just remembered it had something to do with water tanks. That's
Mhm.
wild.
And then cut to about 20, 25 years later, and through the Lend-Lease program, the Soviets are importing thousands of tractors. Farming equipment. And they were just slapping
You
turrets
should
on
have
top of that.
trucks.
It's like suddenly this tractor.
Well, to be
has
fair,
turned
Russian
into a
armor
tank.
was conscripts, so
Yeah, that's a very good point.
so would it really be that
Operation
surprising
Human
to see a
Wave.
Russian farmer going into battle on an actual tractor with a machine gun attached to it?
I mean, hell, we have modern day equivalents of that. I mean, given the Ukraine conflict that's been happening for the past couple of years, the amount of videos
Oh,
that have come
God.
out of Ukrainian farmers on their tractors, literally just like
Hauling
towing
tanks
T-90 tanks behind them, just like, I'm taking this back to the farm. Fuck it.
Dude, they're
We're gonna
using
chop it up. We're gonna
Maxim.
get what we can out of it.
I saw a video of them using a Maxim machine gun, which was available during the Spanish-American War. Like
Yep.
like 1915 water-cooled machine guns, and it's just
Oh
like,
my goodness.
yeah,
The-
110
the
years
types of-
old, still laying out death. My
I
God.
know this is extremely off topic now, but yeah, the types of weaponry that they're using over there, especially the Russians, just
Well, the Russians don't really have much of a
basically
choice. They haven't
anything that
updated
still
since the
works.
80s.
Yeah, really. Basically,
Ugh.
anything that works from the past 150 years, they're still using it, including, as you mentioned, Red, like water cooled Maxims.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
the
Still works.
MG3 is
Mhm.
still essentially the exact same design the Germans used in World War II. It hasn't
Yeah,
changed.
yeah.
And
The
people were
MG3
getting
is
World War
nearly
II
identical
era.
to the MG42. Nearly
Yeah.
identical.
I remember Zach Hazard was talking about it in one of his
Shout out to Mike
campfire
Fire and
things.
Zach Hazard.
Exactly. They were talking about in Iraq when he was there, they were confiscating actual World War II era MG3s.
Oh yeah,
It's like, these are still working.
MG38s, MG42s, Papa Shahs. Obviously Mosins, tons of Mosins,
Oh
tons
yeah.
of
Still using
SKSs, even SVTs.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness.
And the Mosin's
Yeah,
been
still an
around for
effective
over
battle
100
rifle.
years.
Yep.
I mean,
I think the first
Hunt Showdown
the-
1896 has the Mosin Nagant.
yeah,
And
the
that's
the
still been
Mosin
around.
Nagant rifle as we know it in 8mm Mosin, I think was the very first one that was ever like mass produced was 1885, I believe. Obviously, there had been some like middle life enhancements and upgrades as time went on.
Yeah, but essentially the guns
it's a
remain the
rifle
same.
been around for a long time, and it's effectively the same. Yes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
me
It's
and
like
Red want to
having
get cracks
modern rifles that have Mauser actions. Mauser action has been around for well over 150 years, but it's a bolt action that there's nothing wrong with it. So there's no need to improve it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should
Agreed.
definitely go into more depth on this on another episode at some point.
Sorry
So
for
this has
Speaking
been
of-
your
sorry for steering this
military
so off
firearm
topic.
history point of Fireside Chat.
Speaking of depth, let's just go back.
Well, here's a fun fact for anyone. Does anyone know what Point Nemo is?
Point
Wasn't
what
the
now?
Nemo the name of the ship from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea?
No, that's the captain's name. The ship
That's
was
the
the
captain. The
Nautilus.
name is the Nautilus. Yes.
But
Nautilus,
Point
that's
Nemo
what it
in the South Pacific, it's the single point that is furthest away from every landmass. It's an exact point where if you are at that one specific point, you are equidistant from any other known landmass on Earth.
So you literally
Interesting.
could not
You are
be
literally
further
in the
from
middle of
terra firma.
Exactly. It's the furthest point from any landmass, also known as the oceanic pole of inaccessibility. But it's commonly called Point
What a
Nemo.
name. That name is very metal. The oceanic point of inaccessibility. Good lord.
It's going to be the
Sounds like
name
a
of the
horror
new metal
movie.
band.
Or a metal band, absolutely.
Yeah.
The nearest land masses are Ducie Island, part of the Pitcairn Islands, Matunui, part of Easter Islands, and Maher Island off the coast of Antarctica.
Good
That-
lord.
I wonder if it was closer if it went straight down to the bottom under that point. Like, did a seafloor that would be closer to get to land, quote unquote, than it would be to go horizontally across the.
If they drilled straight through the core, just straight down, if they'd reach land faster.
Yeah.
They probably would. Here's a fun other thing about it. Due to its isolation, Point Nemo is the least biologically active areas in the ocean, and is used as a spacecraft graveyard.
Interesting.
So I guess that's where we put a lot of our old spacecraft that we don't put in the aircraft graveyards.
And I imagine that calling it a spacecraft graveyard, that's probably where a number of countries will land their re-entrance vehicles.
That's what I was going
recover
to
them
ask.
on vessels and just let the re-entry vehicles sink, I suppose.
Well, like a lot of the satellites that we put up, eventually their orbit degrades over time,
Mhm.
and then a lot of them burn up in atmosphere. But I was just wondering, does that mean that we like target that point specifically for our?
I don't
for,
think
like,
we
when they're
would.
calling
I
it
think we could probably
spacecraft.
just tow stuff out there and drop it.
Oh, okay.
But here's how isolated it is. The closest living humans to that point on the planet are in the International Space Station.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, you are
In the
closer to the
international,
International Space Station than you are to any landmass.
That's
which
kind of
on
surprising.
average is like 200 miles above the surface of the planet, something like that. 250
Yeah,
miles.
just about.
Like
My
Yeah, it's
hauling
about
ass.
according to NOAA, the North
Oh,
National
National
Atlantic and Atmospheric
Oceanographic.
Administration.
Yeah.
It's
hmm
Point Nemo is about 2,688 kilometers from the nearest landmass.
Oh my goodness! And that didn't even say inhabited landmass.
No, that's just any landmass nearby to it.
Right.
So the closest point that you would physically find human beings from that point is if you looked up at the International Space Station from it.
My goodness. Holy smokes.
And that's just one point in the ocean.
Yeah. And I think this really gets to one of the larger points about the topic at hand, which is just how vast the ocean is, or
And how
the
little
amount
we
of
know.
water there is, and how deep you can go and how isolated it is. So extremely isolated.
I mean, there's a reason people were exiled to the seas.
Yes.
I
Oh
always
yeah.
thought it was kind of funny that it's like looking up out into space looking for aliens when it's like, dude, you want to see something alien, just look at the shit that comes up from the from the bottoms of the ocean.
Oh
Like
yeah.
those things don't even look like they belong in our planet. It's
Yeah, like
insane.
what was it? There was a study a while ago that was like every few times they would dive down and search for something, they'd find even more new species that had never been documented.
Yeah. Yeah, they find something you're like, what is
Like pretty much every
this?
single time
What
they
is this?
dive down and they find something new. I mean, that's not only is that absolutely insane just from a biological standpoint,
hmm
but like just the sheer amount of biological diversity on this planet that lives in the oceans alone.
Oh, absolutely.
And these
And
aren't
I
like
might.
just microscopic things. These are like couple
Oh
meter
yeah.
long predators.
Oh yeah. These are full size. I mean,
And not to
you can
mention the
go
stuff
up
that we
to.
thought was extinct that came back, like the coelacanth.
Oh, that too. That
Yeah,
too.
we thought
And
that thing was extinct for millions of years, and then one gets caught in like 95.
my numbers might be slightly off. I'm sure somebody, an intrepid viewer, might correct me in the comments, or one of you might. But I know that on the surface of the planet, the estimate is that over the course of the past 300 or 400 years, something of that nature, we've decreased the biodiversity on land by 70 or 80%, something like that. It might be even higher. But they estimate that of what we have discovered in the ocean, there is probably that's probably maybe 5 to 7% of all species that exist inside of the ocean. So there are easily hundreds of thousands of species of creatures or different branches of a family tree of certain creatures that we just have never seen, but just due to the size and the biological variability, we statistically they have to exist.
Well,
Yeah, like
and what
if we
about
look
the
at,
fact that there's? Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if we look at like old sailor stories, where there's like ships getting attacked by krakens and mermaids and all this kind
hmm
of stuff, and then we look at like the actual science, it's like, oh, there's no way there could be a squid that big. There's no way a kraken is real. And then we find like a 19-foot tentacle that washed up on a beach,
hmm
and that started the discovery that oh yeah, there actually are animals that big in the ocean.
Oh yeah.
They're
Well, what
just so
about like
deep down that they
megalodon
don't come
teeth?
up here.
Yeah, but like the teeth of the megalodon, stuff like that. It's like okay, we might not have seen it
Oh,
recently, but we know that it's existed before.
those
But like the
huge
super huge
teeth.
sharks,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
the teeth where like it's like their teeth are like equilateral triangles, but they're like 8 inches by 8 inches by 8 inches,
yeah,
like
like they
just
could fit in your
insanely
chest.
sized.
And the fact that
Yeah,
Yeah.
sharks don't even fossilize because their bodies are pretty much all cartilage
that
except their teeth.
hmm
So we have absolutely
Except
that's
no
their
ex-
teeth.
idea
Yeah.
how what could be still down there that's washing up.
And because
ex-
they're constantly growing teeth, you can go to Amazon. Any one of you, anybody listening, anybody here can go to Amazon right now, and you can buy a pound of shark teeth for under $10. because they're constantly growing and shedding their teeth.
Yeah, they
There's
lose them
shark
very
teeth
constantly.
everywhere.
And they have, like, what, 3 concentric rows, some sharks?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
I think it
three
depends on
concentric
the
rows.
species.
And
Yeah.
if I remember right, the Greenland shark is one of the longest living species of sharks. I think the one they've been tracking is, like, nearly 300 years old or so.
Is that the Greenland shark? Is that the one that is very similar to the goblin shark? The one
No,
that
they're
they estimate
much
it's
closer
like
to the surface than that.
okay,
But they're
okay.
essentially they're extremely long-lived because they're so slow. Like, they barely move.
Right.
They just kind of drift along in the Arctic waters.
Huh.
So
Block
their
shark.
metabolism is so slow that
That
might
they
not
can
surface
essentially
for
live for
months even.
hundreds of years.
Right.
Let me actually look.
It's
What
just
is that?
insane. I mean,
The
we know
mean-
the longest living land animals are Galapagos tortoises, and they live about 150 years, I think, are probably the oldest they've ever seen. And
Yeah, here it is.
so
The
to have
oldest
an
Greenland
entity that
shark.
lives, here we are.
Yeah, the oldest Greenland shark studied was estimated to be about 392 years old, with a margin
Good
of error
Lord.
of 120 years. This
Good
means the shark
Lord.
could have been anywhere between 272 to 512 years old when it was caught.
That's
Damn.
that is insane.
I made it
That's so
500
insane.
years. Did your ass pulls me to the surface?
Yeah, really.
It had to be
mean-
somebody.
I mean, there's an entity out there that there's a possibility, although very slim. There's
It's
an
a
entity
shark
out
older
there
than
that has
America.
Yeah, there is an entity out there that has seen the Spanish first land in Central America, all living all the way up to seeing like 9/11, for instance, or being around when 9/11 transpired, which is insane to think about.
Well,
Yeah, just
what is the
the
meme
idea that
that,
someone could live that long.
well, it's like sharks are older than trees.
Yeah, sharks existed on Earth before the first trees started developing.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Yeah,
was the
which
whole
is
thing
just-
with like beetles too. Was beetles have existed before trees because the plants that they were designed to pollinate no longer existed by the time trees
Right.
evolved.
Right.
Oh, I've never heard that before. That's
Yeah, there are
insane.
certain species of beetles that are that old on the planet.
Why do you think they're constantly pushing around poop now, Red? They don't have anything to pollinate anymore.
Got nothing else to do. Might as well just shovel this.
Yeah, really.
Biological shit shoveler.
I used to pollinate all kinds of stuff that doesn't exist anymore. Now I gotta do this. Damn bees taking all my jobs.
Dude, yeah, they're just a Greek tragedy. What is that? Sisyphus had to push the rock up
Sisyphus,
the
yeah.
hill.
Yeah, Sisyphus.
Forever cursed to push his dung. throughout all the time.
Nice.
But going back to the deep sea exploration stuff, we also have a lot of movies that feature that kind of thing. Like, of course, we
yes.
had The Abyss, but
Mhm.
lesser known ones are like more monster movies like Deep Star 6,
Mm-hmm.
Leviathan.
I was about to say Leviathan, yeah.
Leviathan's
What's
probably
that
one of my
new
favorite
one?
ones.
That
There
new one
was-
with the chick from Twilight. That was a deep sea one.
Underwater.
Yeah, that was entertaining.
And that
What-
one was
What was that about?
It was essentially there was an underwater disaster in a mining state or a drilling station that was deep
Okay.
underwater, and you follow her as the whole thing kind of like falls apart. And then at the end, it's revealed the whole thing is caused by fucking Cthulhu,
Of
like
course.
an actual
Of course.
Cthulhu, even though it doesn't look like
Right.
Cthulhu at all. It looks like
Right.
Dagon in the deep ones. It doesn't look like Cthulhu. Yeah, the writer is specifically saying, like he's on interviews saying, yeah, it's Cthulhu, even though it very clearly doesn't look like Cthulhu. It looks like Dagon,
Yeah.
who is technically they're not really rivals to Cthulhu, but they both exist in that kind of they're the deep sea priests that are supposed to be sleeping.
They're both great old ones that are still,
Huh.
yeah, like you said, they're still
Well,
sleeping,
I don't
waiting
think
to
Dagon
be
is a
awoken.
great old one. I think Dagon is an elder being, not a great old one.
Hmm.
Well, there's a reason that all the H.P. Lovecraft stuff, all of his creepy shit either comes from space or it comes from the ocean. Because it's like these great unknowns. Just
Exactly.
don't know.
We don't know what could be out there.
It's just weird that we're inhabiting the same rock as all this stuff, though, and then like you said, there just doesn't seem like I understand the great wonderment of space and why that is so alluring and stuff, and then like you're saying, some of the practical stuff, like going from one atmosphere to zero atmospheres, and and a lot of the engineering things when it comes to going to space versus going deep into the ocean. But I find it very curious that there's not as much, especially like when we need resources, and some of them are only available from the ocean. You would think that there
Oh,
would just be more of a thing
A
about it.
drive to get down
and
there.
and you best believe that let's just take an example. Let's just take crude oil for example. You best believe that there are pockets along the ocean floor that contain immense amounts of crude oil.
That we just
Oh, yeah,
can't
Just
get to from the
absolutely
sheer depth.
gargantuan. Because of the
That's
sheer depth, we just can't access.
that's a given considering a lot of the ancient creatures that used to be living in the sea so long ago, which have now essentially broken down
Hmm.
into crude oil at this point. You got the
Yeah, crude
Mosasaurus
oil is
or
mostly
Mosasaurus.
biological matter.
Hmm?
Yes. So you imagine all of the sea life that used to exist that then has broken down over millions of years. But obviously, they've all sunk down to deeper and deeper levels that we
Hmm.
can't reach just yet, especially with, that kind of technology.
And
Right.
especially when you
Yeah.
consider there's stuff like whale falls, that a single whale corpse falling from, let's say, the midnight zone at least, that
Mhm.
falls down into the abyssal zone, and it can sustain an entire ecosystem of life
Oh yeah.
forms from just
Oh
one
yeah.
whale corpse.
Well, and how far things will come, and that can tell, like they're like how we were talking earlier with submarines and being and how and the
The sheer
distance that
sound.
they can hear. Yeah, and it's like that sharks can smell blood, quote unquote, in the water, that they can sense it from like that distance. I
Yeah,
I forget
it's
what it
about
is,
like
but
a
it's something.
mile,
Yeah,
Yeah,
but they
it's
can
like,
around
sense
a mile. Yeah,
electromagnetic fields from even further.
yeah. I'm like,
and
how does that happen?
and again, that also, especially when it comes to fish or aquatic species detecting electromagnetic fields. Again, it has to do with the medium. It has to do with the medium of water, especially salt water.
Yeah,
Certain
saltwater is
things
an amazing electrical
propagate.
conductor.
Certain things propagate through salt water just
Better.
hundreds of times, hundreds, if not thousands of times further than it would just through just air, if you will.
Yeah,
I
and
just
that's
wonder
also why I
how.
love games like Subnautica,
Oh,
because there's
I
so
love
much.
Subnautica
It's like
so much.
it's an alien planet, but at the same time, you could easily picture like most of that stuff existing in our own oceans that we just don't know about.
Yeah.
Oh
And in
yeah,
Subnautica, I think the deepest you can go is like around 3,500 meters,
I think it
which
caps out at like no, it's shallower than that
some,
because I think the final area you can
shallower
get
than
to
that.
is 1,500 or not
Okay,
oh
1,500.
so
man.
Yeah,
that's
1,500
that's.
meters.
I mean, we can go, by a factor of 5 deeper than that to get to some of the deeper points in the ocean. Like the Challenger Deep, for instance.
And that's and like you said earlier, Red. That's why a lot of Lovecraft stuff is like the deep ocean ones,
Yeah,
Cthulhu's Sunken City of Rayla, and all that.
all
It's
the
like
stuff.
these are all these things that could be down in the ocean that we just don't know about because we
Mhm.
haven't had the ability to get down there, or
I
at
mean,
least
like,
stay down there long enough to discover anything like this.
No.
let's reference one of the most mysterious cities that disappeared under the sea, Atlantis.
Hmm?
That's another big one.
And that's one
Oh
people
my
are still
goodness,
looking for.
yes.
Yep.
Well, that and the
Eh,
continent of Mu.
I'm sorry, the continent of what now?
The continent
I've
of
never
Mu.
heard
Mu,
of that.
MU.
Mu.
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
that's another one of those.
What
It's a
is
mysterious
what is
disappeared
that?
continent that sunk into the ocean.
Oh,
Where
interesting.
would it have been before it sank?
Uh,
I guess.
Well,
it
based
it
off of this map I'm looking at right now, it suggests that it would probably be somewhere in the Pacific. It's a map that's
Hmm.
done by James
Okay.
Churchward.
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
How big would it have been? where
At
it's
least
still
Australia-sized.
above water. Okay,
Australia?
that
That's
is
like
a
continent size?
non-insignificant landmass.
Yes.
Perhaps a
So
little
it's quite
bigger than
large.
that as well, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Australia is wider than the moon. Like, that is huge.
Yes.
Well, the moon itself
Yeah,
is about the size of the entirety of the United States.
hmm
Like, if you
This
took
ain't
the
gonna-
United States and flattened out the moon, you could put the two on top of each other, and the moon would still be a little bit bigger, but not like
Oh,
a significant
my
amount.
goodness. And you know,
And that's a
I pose-
body that's controlling the ocean waves. That has enough gravitational force to affect our water on this planet.
that's a
Yeah, it's
very
very
that's a very
significant.
good point. And I will pose a question, which I think will further this discussion. So, in the '60s, you know, Kennedy said famously in early '63 that we will put a man on the moon before the end of the decade. We ended up doing so with Apollo 11. In 1969, we got a man on the moon. We did that a few more times after that. And the Apollo 11, specifically Apollo 11, at that time, not adjusted for inflation, was somewhere in the realm of like $5 billion. So if you were to adjust that for inflation, we're talking, you know, nearly 50 to 80 billion dollars, depending on how you want to calculate it. And the largest argument of why we have not returned to the moon is, well, there's basically nothing else to get there. It's a cold rock. What's
And
on
that's
the
why Mars is
surface
the
is
next target.
effectively what's underneath it. That's why Mars would be the next target. And I wonder if we had a NASA-like organization with 1960s level funding, but it was dedicated to exploring the ocean depths. Would we be as successful at exploring the ocean depths as we did the moon? A. And B, do you guys feel that it would be as exciting to the general public as it was in the 60s when we landed men on the moon?
I would say
I
probably
would-
not as exciting for the general public, because a lot of people would be like, oh, it's just the ocean. We can see it all the time. As opposed to the moon that we can only see at night.
Right.
And a lot of people are like, that's
200
much further.
200,000 plus miles away.
Plus the perspective between exploring the ocean versus exploring space. You have the ocean, which, yes, as Tobias says, you see it almost all the time whenever you go to the beach or whenever
And
you're
we've
on
been
a cruise.
exploring it pretty much since
Obviously-
mankind developed boats.
Obviously, going much further and deeper is a different story altogether. But I guess from like a visual perspective, it doesn't really sell as well as, say, being able to actually leave the planet in and of itself and
That's a
actually
very good
exploring
point.
other worlds.
Yeah.
That's
Like
a very
that
good point.
That kind of trip is much more exotic, and it does sound a lot more exciting because you're talking about
Right.
exploring completely different celestial bodies apart from
Right.
the one that we call home.
That's a very good point, because effectively, whomever you are, wherever you are on Earth, if it's nighttime, there's a good chance that you can see the moon. You're aware that the moon is extremely far away. And again, we can go back to the 60s and 70s where we actually filmed astronauts getting out of craft and bouncing around on the moon, planting flags, collecting rocks and dust, if you will.
Dude,
Whereas
dope American shit.
the oh, hell yeah, America, yeah.
What was it? The American flag has been on the moon for so long that it's now white, so it looks like France has been
Yeah,
there
it's
instead.
it's effectively white because it's been bleached by the UV radiation of the sun. Exactly. And since it's tidally locked, it's constantly getting hit by the sun. And you're right that the visual aspect, that again, going back to space exploration in the 60s and 70s, the visual aspect on the news, if you will, everybody was tuning in, everybody was watching that, and it was fascinating. And we can try
people
to
bought a
compare
colored
that
TV
to.
just to watch it.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Even
Right.
though it
That
was
was like the
basically just
specific
gray
reason
anyway.
people bought a TV was to watch the moon landing.
Yeah, even though the moon is basically gray anyway, and they were just wearing white suits. You
Yeah.
could see the color on some of the flanges and the flags that they wore, but that's about it. But when it comes to underwater, yeah, you would not be able to. If you could broadcast it, you wouldn't really be able to see much.
It's not something
Especially
you can
because
visualize
the deeper
as much,
you
I guess.
go, yeah, and the deeper you go, the more difficult it is for light to propagate. You can, I mean, some of those very, very, very expensive and intense single or two-person dirigibles that they send down into the depths, they have extremely bright lights on them. We're talking nearly 10,000 lumens.
And they still can't see more
the
than like
light
5 feet in front of them.
Yeah, the light propagates maybe a couple of meters in front of them at most.
And that's why a
which
lot
is
of life
crazy.
forms down in the ocean that deep have bioluminescence.
Yes. Or else they
And
would
a lot
not
of
be
it
able to
is
see.
a trap, essentially. It's like, oh, what's that thing over there? It's
Mhm.
it's a weird thing we see. It's not in the darkness. It's lit up. I'm going to go investigate it, and now I'm dinner.
And that's also why creatures down there, they need to be around, excuse me, they need to be around small expulsion areas that are giving off various minerals and things like nitrogen so that they can continue to survive.
That's actually one of the theories of the beginnings of
cannot
life
get the
on this
sun.
planet, or the hydrothermal vents.
Yes.
Right.
Because of all the heavy materials and stuff that was down there, it's believed by some biologists that that's where life originated, was from those vents.
What do they call that theory where it's like planet-spermia or something, and it's like that a comet or some other celestial body would land in our atmosphere?
Germination.
Panspermia. It would be a stellar object that would enter what we now call the Earth's atmosphere that contained water,
That's the theory of viruses.
various other gases, bacteria, things of that nature. As Tobias said, potentially viruses as well. And that's
that's one of the
certain microscopic life forms. That's the theory of how certain microscopic life forms got here.
Yeah,
because again, if we were to flash back,
yeah, it's a fringe theory that because of how viruses are so radically different from every other living thing on this planet, including essentially their enemy, bacteria, that they are so completely different that there's no way they could have evolved alongside them.
Yes,
so it's theorized that viruses came from something smashing into Earth during its development.
Yes, and especially because bacteria is incredibly small, and viruses are even smaller than that. I mean, we're talking
and viruses are completely dependent on destruction of everything else.
Yes, and they're the only way they survive is by destroying other things. The panspermia theory of the promulgation of various life forms, even especially incredibly microscopic life forms. Although it is a bit fringe, if we were to rewind the clock, let's say 10 to 13 billion years, when this rock that we are on was effectively just a volcanic mess, it would have been so hot that there's basically no chance any form of life, even things like bacteria or viruses, would be able to survive. And so there must be some way that life forms got to this planet and were able to survive. And one of the ways they could have survived is through the panspermia hypothesis and landing landing in the ocean and sinking very deep down to those hydrothermal vents where there was certain gases and minerals so that life could continue to survive without sunlight and without basically without sunlight, and evolve from there.
And if you want to look at just how insane the battle between viruses and bacteria is in the ocean alone, it is estimated that viruses kill approximately 20 to 40% of all bacterial cells daily.
Oh my goodness gracious!
Jeez.
Holy shit!
So that's a war going on per day between those two. And that's just in our oceans.
Mm-hmm. And considering how incredibly small bacteria and viruses are, you know,
It's
they're not
insane.
equivalent to lichen, for instance, but they still make up an incredible biomass, like way more than humans, easily.
I mean, if you were to look at what the most successful life form on this planet is that is not bacteria, it would be ants.
Yes. As far
Which is
as
really
their
weird when you
sheer
consider it.
population and their biomass.
Yeah,
Yeah,
by
this,
biomass and by population density, ants beat out humans by hundreds of percentages.
One of the ways that this was explained to me when I was in high school, for instance, is one of my science teachers basically said, okay, ants are on average a couple of millimeters long. Now, let's just say that ants were 10 times larger. Now, an individual ant would maybe be a centimeter, maybe 2 centimeters long, but there's potentially hundreds of trillions of them. If they were that size, every inch of the planet, if they were to be evenly distributed on every square inch of land mass on the planet, we would basically be knee deep in them.
Oh,
which
my
is
God.
crazy to think about. And this is also the reason why spiders are so important, birds are so important, larger insects that eat smaller insects, things that eat smaller insects. If those things were to suddenly, if you were to snap your fingers and they disappeared, within about 7 days, again, if they were left unchecked by things like birds and larger insects, what have you, if they were to be evenly distributed around the landmass of the Earth, we would be about a foot deep in them. That's how fast they reproduce. That's how many there are. And that's why it is so important to maintain things like birds, to maintain things like spiders.
Especially when we have absolutely no idea what we could be destroying. Like, bringing it back to the ocean and ocean pollution. Like, we have no idea how many species we've already wiped out.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just from unchecked pollution. I mean, that's now. Imagine what it was like back when nobody gave a damn.
Right.
I mean, just imagine how many species we've already wiped out that might have been replaced or mutated to some other form at this point.
Didn't them killing sparrows in China in the 50s, isn't that cause a famine? Because
it did.
So what happened with the sparrows in China was I think this was during Mao Zedong's rule, and he basically declared
it was
that
during the first 5-year leap forward.
Yes, that's what it was.
Yeah.
So during that time, Mao Zedong basically declared that the sparrows were sort of, I believe that they were creatures of Western origin, so they had all the sparrows killed.
They were declared enemies of communism.
Yes, and
How
because
is a
of that,
bird an enemy of communism?
Sparrows
When a bird
were
doesn't have any idea of government.
The sparrows then were essentially incapable of quelling the locust population that existed in China, which, yes, that's what ended up leading to the great famines that occurred.
We had the same issue with the Yellowstone and bringing the wolves back.
Oh, which I think is...
Because they started cutting down the deer population, and that severely fixed a lot of the environmental disasters they were having there at the time. Because the deer population and the herbivore population was so overpowerful that the ecosystem itself couldn't recover. So they had to bring wolves back to hunt them.
And you can look at extremely recent examples. If we go back to just... excuse me. If we go back to 2020, 2021, 2022, when, when tags for hunting deer were not given out, you had suburban neighborhoods that, maybe you'd see a deer run across the road every once in a while. And
suddenly
we were getting to the point after a year or so that you were seeing dozens of deer just walking around the neighborhood. There weren't a lot of cars out. There weren't people hunting them. And there's a reason that the, that the Bureau of Land Management make sure that they keep a good number on the population of things like deer, for instance. And every year they have a set amount of tags that they give out to hunters for the animals that they can take in order to quell those populations so that they do not just grow out of control.
Yeah, because then they starve to death. A lot of, and it's just like, would you rather them get poached and or not poached, get hunted and actually used for something versus just letting them starve to death? And way more of them
Yes.
die when they do that because it's not exactly like the resources are evenly distributed. They go, okay,
Right.
let these ones starve. It's like the majority of them starve or
Right.
die of disease.
There's such an incredible amount of competition. If you have way too many bucks mixed in with the does, they're going to fight each other. And even if one wins and kills the other one is going to be gored so bad that it could die of infection or just bleeding out. Then you don't have enough to produce, and what would effectively happen if you were in the United States, for instance, in the Northeast, let's say, if you were to just stop hunting deer for 15 to 20 years, what you would see is a massive spike in population, and then it would just fall off a cliff. It would just crash. And then you would go to local woods and forests. All the bark would be stripped off. You'd see antlers lying everywhere as yearly they were shedding them. And you would see carcasses everywhere. There would not be food for the deer, so the deer would die. And you might have an increase in insect population, but would there be enough birds to take care of them? Would there be enough spiders, enough larger insects to take care of them? Things of that nature.
As someone who lives in the Northeast, I can actually confirm that a scenario like that definitely would play out.
Oh, yes.
I mean, just around here where me and Red are, there's a lot more deer around because there aren't as many predators. And the deer I've seen, like, around our property are, like, extremely thin. I mean, they're eating the bird seed out of our feeder instead of going for grass because that's all there is.
That pretty much answers my question, because I was going to ask if you meant thin as in they were small or thin as in they were emaciated because there was no
A little of both.
A little bit of both. Okay.
A little bit of both with a few of the ones we've seen. There are some healthy ones around still, but at the same time, I don't really know what it is that's been going around here with hunting and stuff, but there's a lot more deer that I'm seeing.
I couldn't speak to it specifically, but yeah, there's definitely some weirdness going on in Northern California, but that's just California.
Yeah, that's California being California at this point.
I'm sorry, Red. Please go ahead. I didn't mean to.
Oh no, I was just going to say with how dynamic it is with species on land that I'm sure a lot of us have seen, interacted with, or at least is not as foreign as a lot of the stuff that's in the ocean. And it's just like that. Most people when they would see like a forest wouldn't think, oh, this is a great place to jump trash. But with the ocean, they're like, oh, it's so big. What's the big deal? And then you hear
it. Out of sight, out of mind.
Right. Well, and then you see that there's some reports.
Then you get the floating trash patch in the middle of the Pacific. That's an island of itself.
Yeah, and it's like,
that
what
we've had
does
to specifically bioengineer bacteria that eats plastic to start getting rid of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We literally had to make an entirely new life form to deal with this problem.
We generated so much plastic waste, and we've gotten to the point where, what we used to do would, the U.S., for example, would basically take barges full of non-biodegradable plastics, send it to Southeast Asia up to China, and give it to them, and they would dispose of it, usually by burning it, and they've gotten to the point where they would just dump it. Now we're at the point where China, for instance, and the Philippines, Thailand, they have said, no, we are not going to accept any more trash from you guys, no matter what you pay us. And yet, we can still have China, for instance, contribute 30% of all plastic waste in the Pacific Ocean every single year. even though countries are no longer sending their non-biodegradable plastic waste to them.
It's such an insane number.
Well,
It's
what
It
was
is.
it?
What do
It
you?
was China also produces like a significant majority of air pollution in the
They
entire
do.
world.
They do. They produce about 40% of the world's coal ash, which is not good to breathe in. That's for sure.
Yeah, especially with someone who has technically one functioning lung and the other one with a hole in it
Mhm.
occasionally.
And you know, Tobias, you brought up how because of the issue of specifically, but not limited to, the Great Pacific Island plastic patch, how massive it is over the past number of years. We have, I say, humans have bioengineered a bacteria that will specifically eat petroleum based plastics in order to get rid of it. Now, building on that, I wonder if, because of that, and because we have introduced this large amount of fauna, if you will, to the Pacific Ocean, if those bacteria that are consuming these petroleum based non biodegradable plastics, if those are being consumed by creatures in the Pacific, and those creatures are being consumed by larger creatures, and et cetera and so forth, turtles all the way down, if that is affecting species of animals, some species of fauna in the deep sea that we cannot see, then
Yeah,
there
like
might
the whale
very
fall
well
and stuff
be.
like that. The stuff that
Yeah,
gets eaten by those organisms.
yes.
Like the blue whales
It's
eating krill and krill feeding on essentially bacterium.
yes, that is the
So
point
yeah, I
that
could
I'm
definitely
making.
see that
Is
causing more and more issues.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
like we've
Is now
introduced something that
is
wasn't developed in nature, specifically to take care of another problem that wasn't developed in nature.
yes,
But at
yes,
some
exactly.
point, it's
So
going to affect nature itself in some
ex-
cycle.
exactly. So it potentially, instead of just consuming krill, that is just consuming normal flora in the ocean, it's consuming bacteria. Is it potentially lowering the lifespan of these blue whales from 100, 120 years down to maybe 40 or 50 years, which is meaning they're dying off faster, which means more of them are sinking to the bottom of the ocean, which means that there is more calorie dense nutrients for creatures down there to eat? Are they getting larger? Are they expanding? Are they crossbreeding and creating more species? I
Well, the
mean,
fun fact about
is the
that
amount of
is
species that there are,
there is
is the amount of species increasing? For
there is
instance,
the deep sea gigantism, which
yes,
we still don't know why it happens. There are two leading thoughts on that. One is that because these creatures are getting larger, they're more metabolically stable,
hmm
so they're able to grow
they
larger.
have to be to survive.
Or the other reason, I think, was something about body heat distribution because of how cold the depths are.
Right.
Like I said, there's two
Except around
competing.
those geothermal vents where it can be
Oh yeah,
very, very
I mean,
warm.
there's a specific type of snail that lives in the geothermic vent areas, and their shells are essentially made of steel
Yeah, they're
because of how
incredibly
hot it
dense.
is down there.
And it makes you wonder, wrapping back around towards the beginning of this conversation when we were speaking about how, mechanically we have figured out the shapes that would be best for deep sea exploration, but the material science isn't exactly
We
up to
haven't caught up
snuff in
quite
order
there.
to survive down there. What if we were able to grab a number of these snails, let's say hundreds of these snails, and take a look at the structure of their shells, and that could give us insight into creating new materials that would be able to withstand the pressures for extended periods of time to exist at those depths.
It would be a pretty good experiment. If we could figure out what it is that biologically keeps a lot of the much bigger creatures down there from essentially
Mhm.
being crushed to death in the depths, if we could figure that out, we could probably work on working out the
Well,
materials for it.
so
Okay.
there's like physical limitations for things that for anything organic living on land, like the
Hmm.
size that it can actually get, like if it's a mammal, stuff
Yeah,
like
there's the
that.
square
Oh, the
cube
square cube
law.
law.
Yeah.
Yeah, square
Yep,
cube
there you
law is
are.
an important
Yep.
aspect when it comes to this. I looked a little bit into square cube law mainly because of, mainly because of Godzilla, because I wanted to know if such a creature
That's
could
awesome.
ever actually exist.
Well, I mean,
And
come on, kaiju
unfortunately,
movies power most
yes,
science nowadays.
oh, no,
And he's
definitely,
nuclear powered
100%.
at that.
Yes, 100%. But the unfortunate reality is when you take square cube law into consideration, especially with organic matter, like if we're talking inorganic matter, anything that's artificial, well, that's one thing. But organic matter obviously matters a lot more when it comes to size.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
reason that whales crush themselves to death when they're on land,
yep. That
as opposed to being in the ocean where they can get like so much bigger than the largest land
Right.
animals on the earth.
Right. Their
right.
weight is they're able to reach a point of equilibrium of buoyancy where they're able to grow out instead of being crushed by the gravity of being on a beach, for
Surface.
instance.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's the reason that a whale can get that big, but the second it beaches itself, it's essentially gonna die by
Right.
self
It's
crushing.
going to suffocate. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, it's not even that. It's literally its entire body is crushing itself
Hmm.
because the
Yeah.
buoyancy isn't there to support it.
Right. Exactly.
And I did find those two things for deep sea gigantism. So they're called Bergman's rule and Khyber's law.
Okay. Let's
Bergman's
hit those one at a
rule.
time.
Wait. What's the difference between a rule and a law?
I
Oh,
have no idea. I'm not a scientist.
Okay. So just real quick. A
Mhm.
rule is a hypothesis that has been proved to a point where it has been um, peer reviewed by other scientists and agreed upon that if it were to transpire, even if we cannot observe it, that is the most likely. And if it is a law, it is something that has been peer reviewed to the point of agreement that we are able to observe and thus
Ah,
prove that it is indeed the case. So the difference between a law and a rule is observation.
Okay.
interesting.
So Bergman's rule is the size increase is to do with the temperature. So in
Okay,
short,
that checks out. That checks out.
it's the idea that cell size and lifespan would be decreased, but it would increase its maximum body size to effectively control its heat better. So the deeper you are in the
Right,
ocean,
right.
the colder it is, the more you have to have a correct heat dispersal.
And because of the square cubed law, uh, that will increase your outer area, which gives you more area in which to equalize your temperature.
Right. And Khyber's law has to do with food scarcity. According to Khyber's law, the larger an animal gets, the more efficient its metabolism becomes. So because there's such limited
I'm sorry,
food,
did you
you
say
need to
less
have
efficient or more efficient?
more efficient.
More
Because there's
efficient.
less
Okay.
food, your body has to be able to metabolize it much, much more efficiently.
Right.
So
Hmm.
Which
the idea
means
for that
getting
one
more
is,
calories out of it
yeah,
and
and
your
because of that, it
metabolism
gets
being
bigger.
much slower.
Under the conditions of limited food supply, this may provide additional benefit to larger size.
Hmm.
So those are the two leading theories
Interesting.
for deep sea gigantism.
Interesting. Because what's so interesting about that, in my opinion, is it's antithetical to everything we know about how fauna is able to grow to the size that it does. Now we know that yes, in the water, because of buoyancy, and if you were to exist at the proper depth, you can grow to be extremely large. Like for instance, blue whales, which would be, roughly 100 feet long.
Yeah, the blue
Um,
whales, giant squid, giant isopods that are like 3 feet long.
right,
That they
right.
actually
Things of
had
that.
problems with because they were trying to burrow into submarines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, exactly.
Just imagine that you're
And
under the
so,
water. It's like, what the hell's that
oh,
noise? And there's an underwater bug trying to burrow into your submarine.
yeah, exactly.
Oh,
You're
Jesus.
you're a sub that's just launched an unmanned drone out of one of your torpedo pods, and it's just wide enough that there's an isopod that's trying to slide in there and trying to get inside.
And I thought my bug problems were over being in the ocean. We did an off-submarine version.
I will say, I can't imagine being on a sub at the bottom of the Arctic Ocean for 6 or 8 months, just sitting there silently. My goodness, there's a reason they do such psychological evaluations on those sailors.
Yeah, you'd have to be nuts to do that shit.
yeah, really.
Oh yeah.
You can't be so nuts that you go coastal on everybody, but you have to be just nuts enough that you're not going to go crazy being down there.
Total catch-22.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be crazy enough to do it, but not
Absolutely.
just crazy enough to not go crazy.
Absolutely.
You have to be 1 degree of crazy from being absolutely crazy.
Well, I keep going back to like so there's a lot of material science and things that we figured out and things that we've learned from going into space. What do you think would be the great, what would be the thing that we would really get out of that would affect, like, just as like a lazy example would be like we have Velcro, like that was developed because of us going into space, and something that directly affects like the average person that somebody has had like a connection with, and different types of plastics and stuff like that. What would be the thing that you think that we would be getting out of going into that depth? Because there has to be a
Various
financial
rare earth metals.
incentive.
I think lithium is one of the things that's more prominent underwater than it is on land. Like there are certain minerals that develop better in the deep sea than they do on land in like mines.
If it's
Right.
not
So
the
more
rare earth
extraction
metals,
of rare earth materials.
if it's not rare earth metals, my next guess would be some kind of organic materials, or
Oil.
some kind of new life. Well, aside from oil, of course, that's going to be solely America's, big reason.
That's how
to
we're
go
going to get down there.
but-
We're going to convince the military to drill for oil under the ocean.
But the other thing
Forget
would
drilling in
be
Alaska. We need to go to the bottom of the ocean.
The other thing could be potential organic matter that could be some kind of huge breakthrough in pharmaceuticals or in the medicinal fields. That's my guess.
Ooh,
Could
that's
be
another
something of the
good
sort.
one.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, we have
There's definitely
have all
stuff down
kinds
there
of-
for that.
we have all kinds of untapped ecosystems that exist down at the very bottoms of the ocean. So there's a good chance there could be something there that I won't say cures cancer, but it's definitely like a good step towards, uncovering as to how we get rid of cancer or all these other rare
I'm
diseases.
trying to remember. There was I don't know if it was a movie or a game that they were doing specifically that kind of thing. They were doing biological research from underwater creatures, but somehow it mutated humans it got in contact with.
Oh gosh.
I don't know
It
so
could
much
be a
about
movie
that.
or a
It could
game.
be
I know,
either one.
I
That's
know
my
there's
problem.
I know there's a movie where they were studying deep sea sharks and like mutating the deep sea sharks to see if they could cure Alzheimer's. That's
Oh,
how
that
we
was
got the
Deep Blue
movie,
Sea
Deep
with
Blue Sea. Yes,
Oh,
that's
cool.
how we
Jam.
got that. I remember that.
You ate my bird.
Can you believe that movie had 2 sequels?
Wait, there's 2 sequels?
Honestly, I
There
can't.
are 2 sequels
I
to
honestly
Deep Blue
cannot.
Sea.
Do they both have LL Cool J?
No, only the first one does.
Oh, sadly not.
I mean, the second
I
one
pretended-
is an entirely different kind of shark. They're experimenting on makos instead of bull sharks.
Oh God.
So for myself, the 2 hypotheses that I'm thinking of, one ties into what you said, Tobias, and one ties into what you said, Ronan. Going in inverse order, Ronan, what you said, studying biological material, studying the fauna down there, especially with their extremely long lifespans, their extremely slow and efficient metabolisms, being able to well, the biggest hurdle would be finding a way to bring them into a laboratory setting in which to study them.
That's why we
Which
would need a
that's a
lab under there,
whole
a
thing
sea lab,
in
so
and
to
of
speak.
itself. But studying that, you could potentially look into how their genetics are set up, why they have such a slow and efficient metabolism, or not why, but how exactly it functions, and potentially synthesizing something that we could, let's say, for example, inject into a human that could change their lifespan from an average of 80 years to 150 years. And building off of that and tying into Tobias's point about materials, going back to the snails that exist at the very, very, very
They live
deep
essentially in
levels of
the
the ocean
hydrothermal vent areas, and
that
those
live
areas
near
get to be
hydrothermal
at least
vents,
over 700 degrees.
the snails and the nautiluses, the various creatures that have those spiraling shells that are so dense and so resistant to temperature and pressure. If we could again capture enough of them and really be able to study them, figure out their structure, whether it's some type of lattice structure or crystalline structure, whether it starts out as a biological structure that grows but eventually turns into something that basically desiccates itself, but it's already so hard it does not need to continue to grow, and so it has effectively become a mineral. It's something that is dead. We could study those, we could take that, and then we could turn those materials, or whatever materials we could come up with, into something that would allow us to build, let's say, laboratories on the ocean floor at certain pressures, which would allow us to then study what you brought up, Ronan, these creatures that live for so very long because they have such slow and efficient metabolisms, bringing those in and studying them without, bringing them to the surface and having them explode, basically.
Yeah, like
And
if you've seen the
figuring
picture of
out
the
why
blobfish.
exactly that is. Oh, yes. Yeah, if you see
Yeah,
a
the only
blobfish
reason
at
the
a normal
blobfish
depth,
looks like that is because of
It's because
yes,
it's essentially
up to the
exploded
surface,
from the
yeah.
outside in.
exactly. And
Or
if
from the
you look at
inside
a
out.
picture of a blob, if you look at a picture of a blobfish at its normal depth, it
Looks
still looks a
completely
little
different.
weird, but it looks incredibly different. It looks much more like a regular fish, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's a lot of the other problem with deep sea, essentially deep sea living in any form. No matter how long you're down
Yes.
there, you have to have that decompression to be able to come back up, and that has to be done very
Yeah.
slowly.
Yes.
I mean, just at those
And
9 atmospheres of pressure that the Byford dolphin divers would have worked at, it would have taken them at least days to a week to decompress enough to come out
yes.
to normal atmosphere.
Yes, and that's 9 atmospheres,
so imagine
and
being
we
down
need to
there for like 6 months to a year. How long
Right.
would it take for you to come back up and
Well,
be able to decompress enough that your body can get rid of the extra nitrogen and not
And this
flash
is-
fry your brain the second you step out?
and this is another physical
metals.
limitation of humans specifically. Let's say you are adjusting to 10 atmospheres and you're down there for, a year, let's say, just for the sake of numbers. And let's say for the sake of numbers, it takes you 2 weeks of slowly ascending in order for you to adjust to 1 atmosphere. If you were to go down to 20 atmospheres, so
You have to double it.
the pressure, it is not arithmetic, it's multiplicative. So you're not going down double the distance, you're going down 50% more distance in order to hit 20 atmospheres. So let's say, again, for the sake of numbers, I'm just totally pulling these out of my ass, but just for the sake of numbers, let's say you go down 100 meters and that equals 10 atmospheres. You don't go down to 200 meters to get to 20 atmospheres. You go down to 150 meters to hit 20 atmospheres. And then again, instead of taking a week for you to decompress to 1 atmosphere, it's going to take you roughly 2 weeks to get to 1 atmosphere. So now, if we're talking about putting people down to, 800 to 1200 atmospheres, we're talking an incredibly long period of time, to get them down there, and an even longer period of time to adjust them and slowly bring them up to the surface to get them used to 1 atmosphere. And so, much like Tobias mentioned at the very beginning, how saturation diving is one of the most dangerous jobs, but it's also extremely lucrative, not only because you need to be extremely skilled, but it pays very, very well. If we're sending people down to a pressure that's 500, 800, 1,000 atmospheres, we're not just going to keep them down there for a couple of months. They're going to be down. In order to make it financially viable, they would have to stay down there for potentially years, for instance.
Well, you have to when you're building Rapture City. Sorry, guys. This is capitalism.
I was allowed to bring
Even-
one personal. I was allowed to bring one personal item, and I chose Atlas Shrugged. Damn it!
The question still remains, though. The question still remains: how can you sell something like that to a general population, or better yet,
I don't
in order
think
to
you'd
be
be
able
able
to fund
to
this,
to a
how do
general
you sell it?
population. You'd be able to sell
How
it
do
to
you-
more like
well-
a research team or something like that.
Well,
something
That's
Exactly.
that's of course that's
yeah,
the
it
most
would be
likely
more
case.
like a
Then
thing that you
wouldn't-
would sell to researchers or scientists or
you
And
wouldn't
look,
be able
I
to
guess
sell
government
it
agents
to,
even.
Ronan,
more
you
like-
bring up a fantastic point, because let's take someone like Elon Musk. It's much more fascinating and captures the human spirit for exploration to send people to Mars.
right.
Now, if he were to focus entirely on going to the ocean depths, he could probably do it with the amount of money and the amount of talent that he brings in. But like you brought up earlier, showing it off to the general public wouldn't be as exciting to look at. So that
That's-
makes it much more difficult.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to bring it back to that point real quick. I just kind of wanted to wrap it up, at least my perspective on it. So you guys know the company Blue Origin, which is run by
Yes.
Jeff Bezos. That's his
Yep.
his space division that essentially
Rocket.
is in competition with SpaceX. Now he was trying to sell it to the rich billionaires and everything, where you could get on a shuttle for $200,000 and go and explore space for a short bit. That's something
For
that's
30
big
seconds.
and glamorous that
Yeah,
you
really.
can sell to a lot of rich folks that just want to be able to say they went into space for a couple seconds. I
Yeah.
don't know. Again, I don't know if you would be able to sell it like that same thing, but with the ocean instead.
Well, at the
The
same
more
time,
likely
you don't have to
scenario
worry
would
about
be selling
decompression
it
with
to-
space.
No, of course.
A different
But
kind of
the more
decompression,
likely-
but you don't have to worry about if you go down to the bottom of the ocean for
The
an
more likely-
hour. It's not
the
going to
more
take you
likely-
a week to come back, as
The more
compared
likely
to if you went to
scenario
space for an
is-
hour and came back.
Selling this kind of selling ocean exploration, you would be selling it mostly to research teams and other types of organizations that are dedicated to studying the ocean, because at the very least they'll probably ignore something like the Ocean Gate Titan and
Yeah.
just kind of continue forward with it.
As long as your submarine isn't
Right,
made with
right.
subpar materials and driven by a
Right.
Mad Cat controller, you should be fine.
Average person sees Ocean Gate, they don't want to do it, but the scientists, they know
You've been
better.
doing it the entire
Obviously,
time anyway.
they've been doing it this whole time.
Well,
They won't
well,
use a
Ronan,
Logitech controller.
Yeah, they're gonna ask for a dual shock.
Ronan, if I may steelman the opposite of your position for a moment in regards to sending people down to the ocean versus sending them into space. Excuse me, I've lost my train of thought. I'm about to gather it.
No worries.
Sending people into space, Blue Origin recently sent, 9 female famous people, one of them being Katy Perry, and
yes.
they were above 92,000 feet, which made them technically astronauts, even though it was for about 2 minutes or so, something of that nature.
And it wasn't even technically outside the exosphere.
And it was not outside the exosphere. However, you know, I know they established it in like the 70s or the early 80s with the SR-71 because it could go above 90,000 feet above mean sea level. You technically were an astronaut in order to do that.
Thank you for reminding me of Helsing Abridged.
You're so
How are we
you're
going to
so
get
very
you there?
welcome.
The SR-73 Blackbird. Upper altitude of 95,000 feet and a speed of Mach 3.
Which is
How do you know
just
so much about
insane,
it? Do you even read my Christmas list?
Oh yes, I would love a $30 million aircraft. Absolutely, something that can't even land without assistance because it expands and contracts so much based on
Fuck yeah,
the
dude.
heat
And you need
the-
to be an
and the height
astronaut to
that it
fly it in the
goes.
first place.
And you need to be
Yep.
an astronaut, exactly. You need
Don't
to be
work.
wearing a self-contained breathing apparatus in order to fly it.
I mean, that sounds like a normal weekend for rich people. What are you talking about?
But I suppose so. But this goes back
You
to
can't
the,
tell me there
to
wouldn't
the
be
rich
some
people.
rich British guy with fuck off money that would do that.
Well, this goes back to my argument, the rich people argument. Now I know Blue Origin sent up those 9 ladies, because they wanted to have an all-female astronaut space flight, even though it was for a very short period of time, and were to be civilians. I know you can look it up on their website. It's something in the order of like $200,000 to $300,000 in order to be a part of one of those minute and a half space
More
flights.
money than most of us will ever see in a lifetime.
Certainly.
Regrettably so.
However,
speak for yourselves.
well, geez, Red, no need to show off so much.
Yeah, you get those
But when
fancy government electrician contracts. The rest of us don't.
Yes, exactly.
Hey, Red, could you loan me a small loan?
Yeah.
Can I get
I
you
took a small loan of $1 million and I turned it into a real estate empire.
Sorry, guys,
I'm now the president of the U.S.
I fell asleep watching There Will Be Blood. Now I can't stop. I just gotta get the next dollar. You know how it goes.
How will you know who drinks your milkshake, Red?
Yeah, exactly. I just finished screaming, I abandoned my child, and my child was right there. Oh Lord, sorry to derail the whole
so
thing.
off topic, but I don't give a damn.
Of course.
I really hope this does make for an entertaining listen for everybody.
It's very entertaining
course,
to me. I hope it is entertaining.
Honestly, this feels more like one of the old Red Fox talks instead of the Fireside Chat. Where me and Red would just meander around until we came back to whatever we were talking about.
Yeah, we're just talking, having fun. You know, one thing I thought was interesting. I don't know that necessarily it pertains to the ocean, but doesn't to deep sea stuff. Is seasteading? Have you heard about this phenomenon where people are talking about that you could basically create your own craft and then to go out on the ocean, and then you would have more and more people that would eventually connect theirs to yours, and then they would create these communities, and then because they're in international waters, they don't have to comport with any particular laws or whatever, and then it was like these libertarian wet dreams. You ever heard of?
They would effectively be like a small group of people would have a piece of a modular system.
Yes.
And then multiple other small groups of people and other pieces would connect, and they would create a larger.
So, like the idea of how the Pacific Islanders used to do their thing.
Yeah, it's like the biggest gang in Waterworld sort of shit.
Yeah, that's the first thing that was actually coming to mind was Waterworld, basically. Yeah. Just a nice big platform in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah.
Well, they tried to do that in like north of Scotland. There was someone who bought like a derelict oil drilling vessel and attempted.
He made his own little nation about it.
State.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Didn't last very long, did it?
It did not, because it was
Here it
No,
is.
they bombed it.
technically in international waters, but
It's
he did
it's
not
the
have
Principality of
port
Sealand.
laws.
That's what it is.
The Principality of Sealand, and
Wait, isn't
that
Sealand just an
person
island? Isn't there an island
has.
change that's the Sealands?
There is an island chain, but this was specifically
Hmm.
called the Principality of Sealand, and I think it's because, yes, although he was extremely far north of Scotland, he was technically within the international waters of one of those islands, even though uninhabited, was owned by a sovereign nation, ergo could not form its own sovereign nation. And also,
Yeah, I think
because
Sealand is owned by the
if you
Scots,
look
isn't it?
into the UN charters, in order to form a sovereign nation, you need to have a number of very specific things, and you can't just be one guy. You have to be able to set up a policing system. You have to be able to provide things like social security and welfare. You have to be able to take care of the elderly. You have to be able to offer retirement and employment. To that
Essentially, you
nature.
have to be able to literally make your own nation,
Exactly.
which is the
So
entire point of a
maybe
sovereign
50
nation.
people, yeah, maybe 50 people could do it, but one person, no.
Shit, the North Sentinelese can do it. We can do it.
Well,
Well,
that's mainly
Yeah, to be
because
fair, they also
most
built their
people-
spears and
that's a little
helicopters.
different. That's
Yeah.
a little different.
Unfortunately, so.
They haven't even figured the wheel out, and they have their own protected nation. You're telling me we can't figure this out?
No,
Two
they're
things.
living their lives over there without the wheel.
I will say two things. Number
But
one,
they have
as a
figured out
Christian
trigonometry and geometry because they're pretty good at throwing those spears at helicopters.
that's right. I will say two things real quick. Number one, as a Christian, I find it incredibly stupid that there are preachers out there that want to spread the gospel to the North Sentinelese, and they get within basically 50 feet of the shore, and their chest gets filled with arrows and spears. What a terrible idea. You're not advancing anything religious or otherwise, number one.
The only thing you're advancing
And number-
is the time of your own death.
Yeah, yes, you're pushing up the time of your own death drastically. And the
Plus, they
second
don't even
thing,
speak most known languages anyway. They have their own language.
no, they
Hey.
have their own language. Exactly. And the second thing I will say, and this is in regards to the kind of modular systems, if you will, that, let's say there was this libertarian web dream of somehow bringing these modular pods out into the middle of bum F nowhere in the Pacific, well into
Point
international
Nemo.
waters, connecting them together and creating an even larger and larger habitation space.
Yeah, let's say
How
we
on
make
earth-
Point Nemo into some form of floating city.
Oh my goodness. But the thing, again, how are you going to get resources there? How would you?
You'd still have to
How
trade
would
with
you
other
get
humans.
resources there? You would.
Yeah.
You would exactly. But
You would
again,
need-
like you've mentioned with Point Nemo is so far away from any inhabited landmass, much less an inhabited landmass that actually produces things like grain or corn,
Yeah.
for instance. How are you going to get food? Are you
Well,
going
like-
to be able to
What would
buy
you
one of
possibly
those
be able to
smaller
trade with
modular
any other
nuclear
nation?
power plants?
Like, what could you trade? What if you live out on these modular systems? You still have to be able to get food and imports and exports. But what would you export from somewhere that can't produce anything?
The only thing I could possibly think of is the people that would be there would have to be some type of deep sea biologists, and their research, I would suppose.
Something I
They would have to be
That would
able
still
to
depend on
access
Being able to
parts
get in and out
of
of things.
exactly, but they would still have to be able to access parts of the ocean that are otherwise either inaccessible or extremely rarely accessed, and pay for Starlink so that they could upload their
information.
findings and sell them
At a
to
decent rate.
a sovereign
Because me and Red
state
have
or
Starlink out
what
here
have
as
you,
well.
and 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 pay for a large freighter coming from a Pacific nation that's going to ship, again, things like grain and what have you.
Dude.
And also, are they going to be able to get licenses to get these smaller form factor modular nuclear power plants so that they can desalinize their own water, for instance?
I was about to say they're going to need some sort of something that does reverse osmosis or something that they could get. Oh wait, no, that's for air. Never mind. But some sort of desalinating thing
You can
so
do
that they can.
reverse osmosis with water, yeah, but you would want to desalinize. That'd be more energy efficient.
Well, that
Although
would
it takes
also
a lot
bring
of energy
to
to
the
use nuclear
idea of
power
an
plant that would work
undersea
well.
laboratory. You'd still need to be able to do both of those, as well as get resources, but you'd need to have an air supply and some
Oh
sort of
my
power
gosh!
supply.
Of course, you would need air.
You
would
need
need
something
air. And
that
then
is
what would
able
you do?
to transform essentially seawater into breathable air. You need something to separate the molecules.
Which again,
But
you
do
would
it
require
efficiently
something
enough
like
that
a
you can just
nuclear
breathe
power
down
plant.
there.
You would need something. You would need to use nuclear power, and I know the modular nuclear power plants that have been created. I know there's a university in Idaho, I believe, that has developed these where the smallest possible unit of the segmented nuclear power plants is roughly the size of roughly the size of a toaster, if you will, and you can connect multiple of them together and make them even larger, create even more power, and obviously the fuel would last, potentially centuries, if you will.
Yeah.
And also, how, even if you can get the power plants, how are you going to buy things like 30% enriched uranium? And from whom?
Yeah, who's going to
From
sell
who?
you uranium that's not, viably the U.S.?
I think you can
Yes,
get
Chinese,
them
maybe?
out
exactly.
underground in Iran somewhere.
I mean, yeah, I mean, as bad as it sounds, maybe you'd
Well,
have to go into the black market.
I'm
to
not a
seceding
nuclear
nations.
engineer, but I will say it is very dangerous to put 90% enriched uranium into a power plant that requires 30% enriched uranium. That
Yeah,
would
I'm pretty sure that
cause
would be
what we
bad.
call a criticality incident, and then this whole libertarian pipe dream would just become
Chernobyl.
scrap in the water, if you will.
Well,
exactly.
as the resident
Well, at that rate, I
ANCAP
think
here
it
on
would
the
make
panel,
Chernobyl look nice.
I'm going to have to defend my stance on getting our McNukes here. We need our McNukes.
Look, the Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. 350 years ago,
It doesn't
ships had
specify what
cannons,
kind
and
of
people
arms.
on their own land could have cannons. If the federal government has nuclear weapons now, there's no reason why an individual should not be able to purchase and keep a nuclear weapon in their
There
backyard.
is that
The
guy
funniest
named
the
Bob
funniest
who
thing
has
about
2
this-
nukes.
Hail to the yellow and black.
The funniest thing is that those nuclear weapons the U.S. has, those are developed by private companies. Those are
Yes.
private weapons companies.
Oh,
so that's
thank you for
how they
bringing
get
that
them in
point
the
up.
first place.
Thank you for bringing that point up. That is
I
something
probably will
that
have to
people
cut
don't
that little
understand.
bit just to be safe.
People do not understand that the Pentagon, for instance, does not have a manufacturing division that manufactures nuclear weapons. There's a handful of private companies out there that create weapons, and there are a handful of them that create nuclear weapons that are given contracts by the U.S. government to create nuclear weapons, basically.
Well, I mean,
they're all private entities.
That just
Yeah,
kind of
you
goes
can't
to
put
the
the
fact
government in charge of the mail. Why would you put them in charge of building the bomb?
It just goes to the fact, obviously, that government as an entity doesn't actually develop anything. It relies on private entities to do so.
Which means it relies on us to give them money to pay these private entities to get their things.
There you go.
Which means that if we were to get these snails from the bottom of the ocean and study their shells and develop a massively strong new material, they would have to take money from us to give that money to other people for them to collect the snails and study them and to figure out the materials and to create this, this rapture, if you will, going back to BioShock, as Red mentioned, in order to create these underwater facilities. And honestly, going back to the idea of the deeper you go, it's not an arithmetic equation; it's a multiplicative equation. If you were to go down to the ocean floor deep enough, you would effectively have to create basically permanent settlements there, and so you would really, really, really have to make sure that whatever you made your dome out of, if you will, you would have to really, really make sure
That
that
it
it was
doesn't
strong
implode.
enough that it would be able to withstand the pressure and potentially large fauna running into it for a few decades at the very least before it required certain repairs.
Yeah,
It has
And
to be
how do you
someone-
build and service whatever it is that's down there? That's
Again,
well,
how
obviously you
do
just
you?
genetically engineer people to big daddies.
Whoa,
Yes,
no,
that's true.
no, well,
That's
actually,
true.
no. It's funny you
That's
mentioned
literally
that.
what
Like,
Rapture did.
not with the whole big daddy thing, but actually going into that. If we're talking about permanent settlements down there at the bottom of the sea, we're talking about new generations of humans that are going to be born accustomed to this new level of atmospheric pressure. Now,
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Similar
And
to what
without
Musk has
natural
been saying
sunlight.
about permanent
It's the same
permanent
issues we
human
would have
colonies on
with
Mars. They would have
yeah.
generations that would adjust to the lower gravity of Mars. You know, they
Right.
would not
They
be
would
able
have
to
a
survive
completely
on
different,
Earth, but they would be able to thrive on
what's it called?
Mars.
they'd have a
They're-
very
they're-
different immune system because everything on Mars would be completely different.
Oh yeah, their immune
Blood.
systems would be different, and
bone
their
structure
They wouldn't be
would
able to
different
come back
their
to
based on
bone
the gravity.
structure and their physique would be totally different. Their skeletal structure and their muscular structure would
Yeah,
also
literally,
be
it would be so different they wouldn't be able to come back to Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And for
Mhm.
children born at the bottom of the sea, it would be so different they wouldn't be able to come to land. Because if they came
And
up
if
to this
somehow you
atmosphere,
managed
their body
to
wouldn't be
keep
able
a-
to take it.
And if somehow you could take a child that grew to the age of 18 at the bottom of the ocean, put them in a pressurized suit and put them on Mars, they would basically become the equivalent of, you could have a 13-year-old with the strength of like 50 grown men, for instance.
John
Not
Carter
to-
Mars stuff.
Not to derail the,
shout out to John
basically,
Carter.
With
Not
or
to
without the
murder,
budget that
but,
destroyed the movie.
oh, man. This also kind of reminds me a bit too. Have you guys ever heard of a book called All Tomorrow?
No.
I'm sorry, please
No.
repeat.
All Tomorrows. It's a sort
All
of
tomorrows.
Yes.
Yes, I
Yes.
have. I have heard of
Okay. No, because the
Glad you
conversation
guys
does
have, I
make me
haven't.
remind me of how. So Tobias, I'll explain it real quick. All Tomorrows is a sort of speculative fiction book that talks about the evolution of mankind over 1 billion years. We're
that.
talking
Tobias,
about.
you would find it fascinating.
Yeah,
It's
I
it's
can
a
send you a
really
link to
it's
a
a
really
really
good
nice
video on
book. So
Is
in
this
the
similar
beginning,
to,
it's
what the hell was that one called? I think it was just like The Question, and it takes place over millions of years.
Well, Tobias, think about that one YouTube channel that you follow, that you post videos to every once in a while, talking about hypothetical situations in the future where humans run into certain other
Oh, so hi-fi
entities
stuff.
that have evolved in a certain way. All Tomorrows is effectively, as Red is saying, what it describes effectively in the novel is the evolutionary process millions of years in the future, for humans and other entities, but not just a single path, like many, many multitudes of paths
We're
for
probably
every
talking-
single entity.
we're probably talking somewhere about like hundreds of different paths that humanity
Right.
goes, all
Nice.
based on whatever planet that they essentially live
Yes.
in.
Yeah,
How it's
somehow
actually-
they end
check
up
this
on all
out.
fours. Somehow they can end up to be 20 feet tall. Sometimes they'd be 3 tons. Sometimes they'd only be 50 pounds. Sometimes they would breathe through their skin. Sometimes they would breathe through a specific new appendage that they would grow. Things like that. It's
Okay.
just
Vestigial
all
organs
different
and
kinds of
shit.
things.
Okay,
how it
this definitely
starts
sounds like
off-
something I'm going to have to check out.
How the book starts off.
And I hate
is
to
that-
interrupt, but we are, nearly at 2 hours. This was way longer.
Yo!
I think I'm going to have to
Okay.
rechange this, the title of this one from Deep Explanation to Meandering Conversations with Friends.
With an emphasis on
What?
deep sea exploration.
Deep sea meandering.
Yeah, we'll just call it Deep Sea Meandering and go from there.
All right.
Just
Hey, given the size of the deep sea, you can meander for quite a long time, and I don't think anyone would find you.
This is also true. But at nearly 2 hours, I think this is probably a good place to start cutting it down. I think we've officially kind of covered everything we wanted to with this. We've explored a lot of other topics as well, and generally, I just think we've had a good time.
yeah.
Oh, yes.
That's
I
the
would
point.
agree.
Tobias, I'll speak for myself here when I say I very much enjoyed myself. Thank you so very much for the invite. I would
Anytime.
love to come back on again, and honestly, don't care what the subject is. I will read up on the subject, we'll talk about it, we'll meander our way through the various paths to get back on to the one path of the subject, and
Eventually.
I absolutely would love to return again. I had a very, very, very good time. I loved talking to you guys. It was wonderful. Very much enjoyed myself.
How about you, Ronan? You had fun?
Yeah, so I know it was more of an open invitation, but I'm actually glad that I decided to accept it. I thought this was a really good conversation. I liked it.
Yeah, we're
Explored
glad you
all
you
different kinds
accepted.
of things. We're exploring about the sea, what we could do to try and go in there, and brought the discussion of space into it as well. Because
Yeah, then
as
we got into space, and we
obviously
got some military history.
as different as the environments are, like there's definitely a lot that we learn from both of them that helps us get closer to
And I'm just always happy that anyone even wanted to join.
it.
Because otherwise it would have been just me and
Absolutely
Red
loved
here
it.
talking about
There-
stuff.
there- Dude,
Absolutely loved it.
if we hadn't have meandered into space, then I wouldn't have heard that amazing joke about the flag changing from our stars and stripes to being bleached white, and then the whole joke with the French at the end of it. I had never heard that punchline before. That was
Right.
hysterical.
Yeah, what was the other one? It was the people who think that the moon landing was faked and was
Yeah.
filmed in a studio. It was filmed in a studio by I can't remember the guy's name all of a sudden.
Oh,
The guy who
Stanley
wrote The
Kubrick.
Shining.
Stanley
Stanley
Kubrick.
Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah.
But he wanted it to be so authentic that they had to go to the moon to set up the studio to shoot it.
Yes, which is hilarious.
That's good. That's actually a pretty good one.
And on that, I think we will call it there. I will do a little bit of editing. Probably, honestly, not a lot going to be cut out of here because I don't think we had all that much dead air, which is usually all I cut anyway. But I want to thank everybody once again for joining us. Hopefully, anyone listening had fun too. Love to hear more on the topics. I will say ahead of time, there probably will not be a Fireside Chat in August because I will not be here. I will not be in the country.
Okay.
I will be
Right.
going from New York to Iceland.
Oh,
cruise.
very nice.
That sounds like fun.
Oh, a cruise as well. Very nice.
So if any shit
That's
goes
what
down
he's
in the U.S.
calling
during the
it.
month of August, I will not be here to deal with it.
Hopefully,
calling it a
Iran doesn't
cruise.
get any funny ideas.
Well, I'm more hoping Trump doesn't decide to declare war on Canada while I'm in Canada.
Oh, very good point. Hey,
Or
you
try to
know
take over
what?
Greenland
Maybe
while I'm there,
Greenland
too.
would become number 51, and your first stop would be somewhere in Greenland. You'd be like, "Hey, welcome
It pretty
to
much
the U.S."
is, yeah. Well, that, and I don't think Denmark would be too happy about that, considering they still own Greenland.
No, I don't think they would.
And I don't think it would be anywhere near as fun as the Whiskey Wars, which, for those who don't know, was over Hans Island between Canada and Denmark. And their idea of a war was they would plant a flag and then leave their best bottle of alcohol by it. And then the other
You
side
know
would
what?
replace the flag with a different bottle of alcohol.
That's how
Oh, yeah,
real
I've
men
heard
solve
of
their
this
problems
war,
passive
actually.
aggressively.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
called the Whiskey War. So why can't we have more wars like that, where it's just my beer is better than yours, and we're gonna prove it by leaving some for you,
That's right. And we're gonna one up each other like 30 times in a row.
and then finally just end in whatever, we had fun.
Let's all land together and drink what we left behind.
Exactly.
We'll leave as friends. It's gonna be great.
There may be some drunk brawling, but it's not gonna be over countries. Yeah, what was it? The best way to learn about somebody is to see how they handle themselves in a bar fight.
Amen. Amen to that.
So for now, I will say goodbye from Tobias.
See you later from Red.
I will see you later from Big Dog Jake. Feel free to find me on X, Twitter, Instagram and Discord at BIGGDOGGJAKE.
I will say stay hydrated and be great. From Ronan the Crusader, you can find me on X, and you also find me on YouTube and Kick as well. I've been streaming Stellar Blade mostly, having a lot of fun.
Have you modded it?
I have it on PC. I'm having some issues because of my graphics card, so I have to resort to using PlayStation 5. But I have been modding my PC file. Oh yes.
Yeah, mod manager shortcuts. Always the best way. And we will talk to you later on.
Absolutely.
Now,
Like
me and
the
Red are
stream,
probably going to do
nerds.
some hunt, and I'll be editing tomorrow.
Everybody be well.
Days